When we're in so-called mania or MAP C, I abbreviated MAP consciousness for MAP C, which is meaning action potential, C for consciousness, or C for seeing, or C for the speed of light. It's a light domain of a flash of insight and moving based on that, as opposed to thought programs. And oftentimes we'll get to a point at some point where we feel like I am the creator. And the mistake in this is the difference between the word the or the and a or a. So when you change the sentence from I am the creator to I am a creator, then there's a lot more sanity in that. So I just looked it up, and the and a are both adverbs. So the difference is just a mistake in the adverb that one uses. So by changing that, one can realize that one is a creator, one has the capacity to create. Even just by moving an object from here to there is a creative process. And a walk can be done mechanically and unconsciously, or a walk can be very creative. One can walk creatively. So there's a different quality there when one is creative, but doesn't mean one is the creator. There's likely no the creator. We might think that we are the creator if we attribute it to a separate ego self. If we feel like we have a separate ego self that's real, then we might think I am the creator. When we realize that there is no self, and that's when the creative process is there, because innate within all of us is this creative process that is there when there is no self operating, because the self is the past and the memories on loop, and that's not creative, that's old past memories, and creativity is new. So it's a mixture when the self is there, or one is in that creative process and then the self comes in and takes credit for it. And as soon as it does, the creative process is over, and one might think I am the creator, create a story about it, and now one is living in a story and instead of being in that creative process. So I feel like that is one area where something like a mania, which is just an extreme state of energy, goes wrong, in that one goes from the creative process to thinking I am the creator. So identifying with the creative process as the personal self, which just pretty much adds a major shot of amphetamines and adrenaline into the ego. And I say that metaphorically. I don't really know what happens, but it just amps up the ego even more, and then that gives the ego a lot of fuel to identify with all sorts of things and create stories out of it, which is no longer a creative process. It's just living in stories, which is what the ego is doing all the time. It's living in past stories. But now it's living in different stories, maybe more puffed up stories, but it's still a story. So in order to remain a creator and not feel like the creator, one must have an absence of the I, the me. Otherwise, it's going to amp that up. So it's just a mistake of language, which so many things are. In this case, between the and the a. So even just replacing the with a in a lot of language could create a lot more sanity. We say something like, the girl was walking. I feel it's a little bit more resonant to say a girl was walking. What is the girl? There's no the girl. So maybe there's no such thing as the or the, however you want to say it, in whatever way it's used in a sentence. Can it be replaced with a or that? That girl was walking. That particular girl. Or a girl was walking versus the girl. And I don't know if anyone will sense the subtle difference here, but even just getting rid of that in one's language, especially as somebody who has language creation propensities and extreme energetic states that might turn into stories that we identify with, if we're not using the word the very much, then we have less chance of feeling like I am the creator. If we edit the out of our language wherever possible, maybe we'll just feel like I am a creator. I am creative. There's a creative process happening. There's a creative process happening through this organism. There's a book called Drive Yourself Sane with General Semantics, and I feel like this is general semantics. So sort of like semantics for people who have a propensity to go into map consciousness or so-called mania and have trouble with language and trouble with a lot of energy producing new memes and thoughts. And if we don't quite have our pronouns right and our adverbs and our verbs and all that, when that process is initiated in the brain, it can create a lot of trouble in identifying with certain stories. Like, I am the creator. There's no problem with the story, I am a creator. Just the difference of the word. Can you pass me the pencil? Can you pass me that pencil? Can you pass me a pencil? So I feel like it sounds like it's not a big deal, but it could be a big deal to get with these types of more sane ways of speaking, even if they're very tiny, because this energy comes in that wants to create more language, whether it's poetry or rap or new memes or insights or ideas or visions. But if we're tripped up by a word as simple as the, maybe if that first thing in the Bible was first there was a word, not the word, because as soon as we say the word, we think the word of God. Well, what is that? Well, then it creates all these stories. Maybe it was just a word. Who knows what that first word was? It was just a sound. First there was a sound, but the word is a lot more narrow-banded focus than a sound. Because if we think first there was the word, we're going to think, well, the word of God, and what did God say, and what do I have to follow? But if it's first there was a sound, well, each of us made a first sound when we were little. If we don't have fun with ourselves, someone else will play with our brains at their benefit and profit. Your brain is to create you, to benefit you and others. If we don't experiment, if we don't understand, we will be experimented with. I remember touching on this, and I did touch on some of these things when I was talking and not really following my notes so much for a while, but it might be worth touching on again. And it's related to what Dr. Daniel Siegel talks about when he talks about how we need to differentiate and then link. And I never quite understood what he was talking about when he was saying that. But I realized that as peers, we might have some trouble differentiating. And what I mean by that is when we're having a lot of insights and associations and seeing and visions and connecting the dots and saying new things we've never thought of before, we're linking, we're making new links. Each new meme or thought or perception or feeling or insight is a new link. And everything starts to feel like ourselves. The stories or the words that we're hearing ourselves say, other people, everything feels so linked that we start to lose a sense of ourself or a separation. And so we feel so linked when we go into map consciousness or map C, which is the meaning, action, potential of light. See, light. And so we keep making these links and links to others so they feel like self. And it is just one mind, so it is all self in that way. So what part of the feeling of self must remain? Maybe only that we have this separate body that we do have to take care of. And that could be part of what gets us into trouble, is that by making so many links, without remembering to take care of our body so much, our body starts to realize that it's not getting the attention that it needs. So it starts to create fear to call our consciousness back to our body. But really, we usually see this fear as that we should be afraid of something, and then a story will be created around that, and then our body starts acting out gestures and behaviors of fear, and then we get captured. But really, I've talked about this before, how this fear seems to call consciousness back to almost remind us that we have a body that we need to take care of. And when consciousness goes too far, it might feel like to the body that we're going to start neglecting it. And a lot of times this fear will actually induce some kind of suicidal behavior because the fear is so strong, when really the body's just asking for care. But sometimes the body ends up being ended because of the fear that it induces to call us back to care for the body. And this is not the only thing. I'm just talking about this in a million ways, like I always do. Because I've already had that sense sometimes that the fear is calling consciousness back to remind consciousness that there's a body to take care of. So I wonder if that's the main thing that we need to differentiate, is care for the body and continuing to care for the body. And other than that, is there anything else that distinguishes us as this separate self? Like, is there a self other than the body? Or is the rest of it shared? I feel like the rest of it's shared. So I remember in my first state of map consciousness, I was in that state for 2 months, and by the end of it, my hair was falling out and I was 90 pounds. So consciousness had gone too far outside the body, and a lot of the energy of the body was being burned up in use of, for the energy required to make all these links. But I wasn't able to keep my body well. But I made a lot of links to include a lot more elements of the mind as myself. So it can take a while for us to again distinguish what is ourself. And when we do come back from map consciousness, we do regain a lot of ego consciousness, because that's the game that we're playing in society. So we do have to have that. It would be interesting if we could develop the capacity to just know when to turn off that sort of autopilot mode of being in the world. And I think that's part of what's bothering me, is that I need to operate as sort of this ego self-defense. So all of it is ourselves, including our bodies. We have to take care of our bodies. There is no separate self to defend. And I'm saying this as say willing and see willing possibilities, not as I'm in that space right now. So the body gets scared when we identify with all, which means we identify with nothing. Because sometimes we lose even identification with our body. So can we maintain the identification and awareness and intelligence to take care of the body, but lose all the other identifications? And I've definitely disidentified from my body in so-called dissociation, which is just feels like disidentifying from everything and feeling terrified, maybe like a baby left out on the sidewalk. So the body gets scared when we have too much information running through us as well. I feel like calling thoughts ruminating loops, because saying the word thought makes it sound kind of unharmful or just something. But when it's called a ruminating loop or something, that actually describes more of what it actually is. So a thought, the word thought doesn't really illustrate what a thought is. Whereas the term ruminating loops, or maybe ruminating sound loops, or ruminating sound and image loops, that more describes what it actually is. And the brain can either be creating understanding for us to see, or we're just seeing our past images and ruminating loops of images and sounds. And I also thought of creating some heart lines, which are like news headlines, but I feel like I'm not necessarily living my dreams because I'm not creating my own heart lines. I thought of creating a little publication called Visionary Heartlines, which are just bites and bits of happy news for people living in this visionary consciousness or moving towards that. So an example of a visionary heartline would be first medication-free respite opens in this city. So visionary heartlines would be a magazine for trans-conscious, map-conscious, omnipolar people, that neurotribe. Or it could be called mental heartlines, and it could be all about what trans-conscious altruists are up to. And to go with what I was talking about last, there is a part of consciousness that's localized in the body, and the rest of it is shared, because all is consciousness, and we share all of this. It's shared and non-local. It's quantum, and it's what makes things possible. If we take action towards our visions, then matter will follow. And I think I got an intimation of that statement from those animal medicine cards that I was exploring a while ago. And I feel like self-dialogue is accessing the teacher within, the inner guru. It's kind of related to that documentary called Kumare, where we really do have this inner guru inside and this wisdom that we can bring out. And I found that the process of bringing it out is just to speak to oneself, because otherwise it lays kind of dormant. The sound vibration is what creates more sound vibration and invites more of it out. Just like if one wants to be a good singer, most of the time one needs to sing in order to get all of the physiology in alignment with being able to do it proficiently. Well, if one wants to have an inner guru come out, one needs to speak in order to get the physiology in alignment with having that voice always able to arise. And that happens in map consciousness. We feel quite wise a lot of the times. But again, we haven't really brought that out consciously. It's there because we are invited into that state energetically, but it's not a stage. So in order to make it a stage, we need to exercise that faculty. And I've said the word practice, but maybe it's more like exercise, but that sounds a little bit like exorcism. Because to exercise is just to exercise. To practice assumes that there's some kind of accumulation, like the me will get better. But maybe just exercising it is speaking actually exercises the muscles and the physiology that make this possible, as opposed to thinking there's a me that's practicing something that makes the me better. I don't know if one can sense the subtle difference of what I'm saying here. It's one thing to sing all the time, and one could think that the me becomes a better singer. But really what happens is that the body becomes more proficient at being able to sing because it's been practiced in that way so much. So all the muscles and the tongue and everything knows how to sing, and it's not even a conscious thing anymore. So in the same way, one can exercise their inner guru. And it's not like there's a me that becomes this great guru, but the body is exercised in being able to speak in that way. Because we all have access to a wise voice, a wise version of a human being within us. But we don't exercise this. We don't talk to ourselves. We have these ruminating loops going on in our heads, and we identify with that. And what I'm saying is, if we speak in our inner guru type way, that will invite that voice out. Not because there's a me there getting better at it, but just using the body as an instrument in that way makes it possible for that way of communicating to be there. Just like singing a lot makes it more possible for a person to have a body that's good at singing. And it has nothing to do with the me. A while ago, I was listening to Ken Wilber's podcast on superhuman potential. And when I was listening to it, I realized that in map consciousness, we start to see the it's, the we, and the it domain. And we start to see them as ourselves, as not separate from ourselves. And this is part of what messes us up. And one would have to have a little bit of understanding of Ken Wilber's work to know what I'm talking about there, but I want to mention it to myself. And I made a note to myself to talk about the benefits of being away. And a lot of the benefits are some of the things that I've talked about as the opposites of so-called mental illness, like nature, sunshine, nature, sounds and smells, and quiet instead of noise. And I feel like one of the most fundamental opposites of mental illness is silence, inner silence. And outer silence helps with that too, because the nervous system isn't being bombarded with noise. And consciousness is life streaming instead of streaming dead thoughts on repeat. I like the Spanish word for yes because it's sí, which is sort of like I see or see if you think about it in English terms. It's like saying I see, not just yes, I know from knowledge. And I feel like creating is see-minding oneself to do something, which is a type of reminding oneself by watching one do it. So I wasn't really into the self-dialogue thing today, but just by doing it, it was a see-minder, being reminded by seeing myself doing it, by actually doing it. Because we tend to remind ourselves with our thoughts and then not do it, but if we just make a gesture of actually doing that, then the whole organism is reminded by the act of doing it. And I created a new word, the warm system and the cold system, because I talk a lot about the mental health system and how there's so many elements that aren't helpful. And I'd like to call that the cold system, like psych wards, medication, paternalistic psychiatrists. And then there's the warm system, which are things like the clubhouse, all the people with warm hearts, even if they work in the cold system, are part of the warm system. And I kind of got that by seeing that there's warm lines and hot lines. Well, there's a warm system and a cold system. And one thing I want to work on this year is my subjunctive or subjective tense or something. I've noticed that I say was a lot when I think I'm supposed to say were, and I say is a lot. There is when I should be saying there are. I've done that a lot, and I don't exactly know when I'm doing it, but it's definitely there, and I don't know if I've been doing that my whole life, or I feel like I used to say were in the right time, but I sort of lost that at some point. I don't know if that's true. We like to change the channel on the TV because we can't change our own channel, what we channel, what is channeling through us. We are ego channels, and the brain is an ego receiver. We don't know how to create our own show. People are profiting off our lives by tricking us that we are not prophets of our own life. Our life energy literally translates into money in their pocket, into numbers in a computer. They look for those who feel they are prophets and see dollar signs. We have to prophesize our own life to create. It's similar to positive thinking. I would call it positive understanding, which is understanding something for oneself without referencing whether it's right or wrong as told to us by some kind of educational or psychiatric authority. Change what you channel. We can channel anything. Sometimes it happens by accident, like when someone has a brain surgery and wakes up to compose classical music. Savants are channeling beyond the computation of the brain. The computation of the ego gets in the way of this. Yet this is our ego station, channel, and it keeps us stationary living in a story instead of channeling our creation. Know when it's time to change the channel and whose show you're in. We still have to be tuned into the created reality and not go into our creation by ourselves. Getting in touch with our creative nature looks like mania to others. It's not that bipolar people are creative. The creative energy suspends and fluidifies the ego. They can't enter this. It's fluidification. I'm non-linear right now. I'm quantum right now. Once you make meaning, it folds back up and is no longer relevant in the next moment. Access to meaning is not an accumulation, but an unfolding. A seeing. If we see something, it unfolds. And it likely unfolds in the material as well, and then makes its way to meet our nervous system.